Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup, TGIF, except for the whole nuclear Armageddon thing. That's right. Last night, behind closed doors with his fat cat donors who have bought the government, President Biden said we are closer to a nuclear Armageddon than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Biden offers stark Armageddon warning on the dangers of Putin's nuclear threats. President Joe Biden on Thursday delivered a stark warning about the dangers behind Russian President Vladimir Putin's nuclear threats as Moscow continues to face military setbacks in Ukraine. Quote, "First time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, we have a direct threat of the use of a nuclear weapon if, in fact, things continue down the path they are going," Biden warned during remarks at a Democratic fundraiser in New York, where he was introduced by James Murdoch of the Murdochs, interestingly enough, the youngest son of media mogul Rupert Murdoch. He added, "I don't think there's any such thing as the ability to easily use a tactical nuclear weapon and not end up with Armageddon. It's striking for the president to speak so candidly and invoke Armageddon, particularly at a fundraiser, while his aides from the National Security Council to the State Department to the Pentagon have spoken in much more measured terms, saying they take the threat seriously but don't see movement on them from the Kremlin. Quote, I'm trying to figure out what is Putin's off-ramp, Biden said during the event. Where does he find a way out? Where does he find himself in a position that he does not only lose face, but lose significant power within Russia? Let me read the full statement that he made behind closed doors. Quote, "We have a direct threat of the use of nuclear weapon if, in fact, things continue down the path they are going. I'm trying to figure out what is Putin's off-ramp. Where does he find a way out? Where does he find himself in a position that he does not only lose face, but lose significant power within Russia? We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. He's not joking when he talks about potential use of tactical or nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons because his military is significantly underperforming. I don't think there's any such thing as the ability to easily use a tactical nuclear weapon and not end up with Armageddon. I didn't realize how much serious damage the previous administration did to our foreign policy." So I don't know where to begin. First off, we should say Putin obviously is unpredictable. That's not to go to the origins of this war between Russia and Ukraine. I've said from the start, we shouldn't just erase that the Soviet Union was lied to after the fall of the Soviet Union. The U.S., NATO promised we will not go further eastward past reunified Germany. Obviously, they blew past reunified Germany and lied to Russia. And Russia has threats on its doorstep. To me, that does not excuse or absolve Vladimir Putin from launching a war and invading Ukraine and very clearly targeting civilian targets, killing innocent people. That does not excuse what Russia has done. With that all said, Biden, I don't know what the hell he's doing, but somebody needs to put him for his afternoon nap, because this is reckless talk, and it's not exactly based on any imminent intel, according to people in the U.S. government. I mean, this is CNN following up. Biden's stark warning Thursday night that the world faces the highest prospect of nuclear war in 60 years was not based on any new intelligence about Russian President Vladimir Putin's intentions or changes in Russia's nuclear posture, multiple U.S. officials told CNN. The U.S. has still seen no evidence that Putin is moving towards using Russia's nuclear capability, nor is there any intelligence showing he's decided to do so. But Biden's comments, laid out in starker terms than other U.S. officials have used to date, reflected heightened concerns inside his administration about the risk of Russia carrying out a nuclear strike in Ukraine, where Russian forces have recently faced a string of defeats. Biden's blunt assessment caught several senior U.S. officials by surprise, largely due to that lack of any new intelligence to drive them and the grim language Biden deployed. So, first of all, I usually don't believe U.S. intelligence, but on this, I mean, I'm assuming they're telling the truth, that there is no new intelligence, that Vladimir Putin is, imminently planning on doing a nuclear strike to Ukraine or elsewhere. Secondly, when Biden, compares this to 1962 and the Cuban Missile Crisis, well, in 1962 in the Cuban Missile Crisis, Florida had nukes pointed its 90 miles off of its border from Cuba. That was an imminent threat to the United States. This is not. That's not to say Putin is not unpredictable. That's not to say Putin is not unstable. I was wrong. Many people were wrong, didn't think he'd actually invade Ukraine. He obviously did that. So this is somebody that is unpredictable, which is why if you don't have any intelligence or any real movement that tells you, oh, we actually have reason to believe he's preparing for some type of nuclear strike, you don't say it in public, and you certainly don't say it in private, because he is unpredictable. Putin might have absolutely no thought of nuclear weapons. He might be posturing that he's contemplating it, but behind closed doors, he might not be that crazy. But Biden putting it out there to an unpredictable sociopath, because Putin is a sociopath, might drive him to do so. So it is beyond reckless. And again, this is not nukes pointed at Florida from Cuba. Okay? This is not 90 miles off the U.S. coast. This is not, as in the case of the Cuban Missile Crisis, all the generals swirling around Kennedy plotting to basically fool him into invading Cuba, because that's exactly what happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis. The generals trying to take advantage, they viewed as an inexperienced president who, wasn't aggressive enough. They were basically lying to him and conjuring up a false premise to invade Cuba and start a full-on war, which could have potentially become World War III. And it could have become nuclear Armageddon. This is not that. Now, that doesn't mean Putin hasn't threatened nuclear to use nukes. He has. But again, you have to be very careful as the American president to start talking about nuclear Armageddon, to start comparing it to the Cuban Missile Crisis, because that kind of talk can actually steer him into doing something that he previously would not have done. It also, this kind of talk, and by the way, I kind of thought this was not surprising, but we wrote this weekend how Biden tends to be more candid, less guarded at fundraisers. And tonight at the DSCC event, he said the risk of nuclear Armageddon is the highest. Isn't that interesting that Biden's most comfortable around fat cat rich people donating? Anyway, I digress. The fact that he said it at this fundraiser kind of says all you need to know, that he felt very comfortable with the corrupt donors that buy off Biden, the Democrats, Republicans, because we live in the United Corporations of America. But what is very interesting timing-wise is he made these private comments, which, stuff from fundraisers leaks, he knows that, right after Ukrainian President right after Ukrainian President Zelensky calls for preventive action to deter Russian nuclear strikes. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Thursday called for the international community to take, quote, preventive action to deter the potential use of nuclear weapons by Russia in the ongoing war in Ukraine. In an address to the Lowy Institute, a nonpartisan international policy think tank in Australia, Zelensky underscored the importance of preventive strikes, preventive action, so that Russia can get better picture of the potential consequences if they move to use nuclear weapons. Preemptive steps are crucial to deterrence, Zelensky said. He cautioned against, quote, waiting for the nuclear strikes first. The Ukrainian president's press secretary, Sergei can't pronounce, later clarified Zelensky's comments after some media interpreted the suggestion to include preemptive nuclear strikes rather than non-nuclear steps like sanctions. Okay, I think we know what he was talking about. Listen, I feel for the people of Ukraine. I don't understand, leftists who are rah Russia. Yeah, Ukraine clearly has a Nazi problem. You know what? The United States military has a Nazi problem too. There's plenty of reporting. There's Nazis all over the world. There's white supremacist Nazis in military in Russia, in Ukraine. The Azov battalion is not all of Ukraine. And I do feel for innocent people in Ukraine that have been murdered, families broken apart. I feel for the people of Russia. A large portion of them are against this war by Vladimir Putin. I think NATO is, the corporate media basically is in bed with NATO. NATO, to me, needs to be disbanded completely. In many ways, it's become a terrorist organization. So there is a lot of nuance when it comes to this war. I don't understand people who are like, rah, rah, I'm all Ukraine, or rah, rah, I'm all Russia. If you're anti-war, you're anti-war, period. And to Biden, let's be clear. Biden is an old style, the communist boogeyman kind of politician. He came up in politics in the 1970s, 80s, 90s. He buys into a lot of the BS and a lot of the fear mongering and a lot of the propaganda that the politicians of that era with their allies in the media put out about the Soviet boogeyman and communism and Russia. He buys into a lot of that. That's not to say there is no threat from Vladimir Putin. That's not to say he would 100% never use nuclear weapons. He has to know if he used nuclear weapons, that would be the end of Russia. But why even take the chance? Why even take the risk to put this out there that could actually be pushing him towards irrational, reckless, truly cataclysmic, apocalyptic actions like a nuclear strike? All I know, we'll be monitoring. We'll also be monitoring Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, and the rest of the military-industrial complex to see how quickly their stock prices go up with all this talk of a nuclear Armageddon. But this is extremely dangerous, and Biden needs to walk this back immediately.